What's up, everybody? It's Phil here. Welcome back to the Death and Narratives podcast. We got Conrad here, new guest, probably intermittent co-host as well. We're going to be talking a lot of stuff, mostly the Iran war and the West and the Epstein syndicate that runs the Iran war. So let's get into it. Day 23 right now of the Iran war. About 1, 2, 3 weeks in. There's a few topics I had here that I wanted to go over with you and get your input on and just kind of wrap back and forth on. I think first would be Brent crude right now is at 106. $106. Let me look at it started at 70. Yeah. I mean it's gonna go to 120 pretty soon, probably. That'll be that means the equity market's probably gonna crash. A lot of stock markets are gonna crash when that happens. So there are reports in the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, I believe, a lot of Southeast Asian countries that didn't have relations set up with Iran quite like China did. They didn't have the diplomatic relations set up to have deals for oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. I believe I saw today that in the Netherlands, gas there, like for your car, is about 250 euros a liter, not a gallon, a liter. For the math that works out, that's about $8 a gallon, the conversion. Gas has risen about $1 a gallon here overall. And it doesn't seem to be stopping. It's going up about 10 to 20 cents every couple days. So what do you think? And I know we're a little bit insulated in America because we have a large domestic oil production. But what do you think the ramifications in America are going to be because in places like Thailand they're doing they're rationing oil. Some places are ramping up the work days in order to have more labor to like produce more. Other places are ramping down their economies because they just have less energy to produce things. Do you think, I think there's a reality, do you think it's a reality that there will be oil rationing here, that there will be oil shortages, gas shortages, or maybe that it'll just get so expensive that people won't be able to afford it? Do you think that's going to happen, or do you think America will end this or somehow have some sort of strategic reserve, pull some sort of rabbit out of the hat to stop that?
I think the next stop is going to be the stopping oil and gas exports from the United States. The U.S. produces enough energy and oil and gas probably to sustain itself. The prices, however, are global. Yeah. And it's going to get more and more expensive, especially in the short to mid term and the long term. I mean, there's really no stopping this at this point. 20% of the world's oil has been cut off. A lot of refineries are in the Gulf, so even if we stop crude oil exports from the United States, gas, jet fuel, all oil needs to be refined, is going to it's going to be in even shorter supply. So what we're looking at is a steep increase in the price of oil in the United States, which is going to lead to inflation in every other aspect of the economy. You're looking at the chairman of the Federal Reserve last week decided that they're not going to lower interest rates, even though there's a financial crisis brewing, because they are worried about inflation. Now, notice, if they're worried about inflation, what should they really be doing is they should be raising interest rates to try and combat inflation. Raising interest rates is going to decrease the amount of money in the system. But what we're also faced with at the same time as we're faced with this oil and gas squeeze and this natural gas squeeze is a financial crisis, which has gone under the radar. That's essentially put the federal government and the Federal Reserve in between a rock and a hard place, where the financial markets, the big banks, the major hedge funds, and major funds like BlackRock and Blackstone are going to need bailouts because of the big risky and shitty assets that are on their books that they've been lying about, essentially. They're going to need money. They're going to need money loaned to them at very cheap interest rates, and they're going to need a lot of it. The Federal Reserve is holding steady, and they're worried about inflation, but they're going to have to cut rates if they don't want those institutions to go under. And they don't, because the federal government is completely captured by them anyways. So what we're going to be looking at, I think, in the short term is prices are going to rise gradually, week by week and month by month. There may be some dips, and they're going to be able to pull their hats out of their hats, in the short term. But eventually, these problems are going to start to compound on each other, and they're going to become exponentially worse. I don't know if we will get to the point of oil and gas rationing, because oil and gas are produced in such large quantities in the United States. But we will see significantly higher prices in everything, because that petroleum and energy are connected to every other aspect of the market. And we're going to see, at the same time, our economy tanking. Jobs are going to be hemorrhaging, and we're going to have a stagflation period, which I think is undeniable at this point. We have that already. We just saw the last jobs report was minus 92,000. So that is going to hit us in a way that probably hasn't hit us before, that Americans are not used to. And people are not aware of what's coming. I don't think they're ready for it. I don't think Americans are ready for it at all. They're not prepared. Most people really can barely afford things as is. So we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah. I think, quite frankly, and a lot of people around us, I think, are in denial. But I think when I say these things, they would say to me that I'm catastrophizing. But maybe because I think both of us have certainly been predicting something like this happening since COVID started, basically, at the very least, and that's been 6 years. And so people tend to think, well, it keeps going, but I'm kind of reminded because we were talking about the the tenuousness of the American economy and how you were talking about, I think earlier with me privately, about how the pension funds, there have been some cockroaches, shall we say, right, in the pension funds. So there are certain people who are basically trying to take all their money out of the pension funds because some of the people managing those investments turned out to be fraudsters, to put it succinctly. And I think it was Jamie Dimon who said, right, his famous quote, when there's one cockroach, there's usually a bunch waiting in the wings, right? So I think the American economy is currently hanging on by a thread. And even though it is still hanging on, people see it's hanging on, I think it's hanging on by a thread. And I think even if we don't have a gas crisis, the likes of which other countries are seeing, it may push us overboard, just because there's already so much market manipulation to try and keep this thing going. And I sent you this thing today. I think that this guy Nemo was interviewing Gerald Celeste or whatever. He's an analyst, and
Joe Salente.
Yeah, he was talking about how we have been buying precious metals, and it was kind of weird for us to see how they hadn't really skyrocketed in value like I had thought after the beginning of the Iran war. And he was kind of rather pointedly saying about how rigged they are, and I don't have the details on that, but let's see. I think I have a story up here.
Well, J.P. Morgan, I think, was fined a bunch of money in 2020, and they've been fined a lot.
Right. They were indicted. Yeah. I don't have the story up here, but I was just looking at it. The DOJ actually, I think in 2023, convicted 2 of their traders and fined them a very large amount of money for rigging the precious metals market. And this is back in 2023. And I think they've basically been trying to suppress the ecstatic rise that the precious metal markets would be having, especially in relation to the equity markets, so the stocks and bonds, and even maybe things like American real estate, because if people start to realize that things like precious metals are a better investment than Nvidia stock, something like that on a large scale would collapse the economy. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be the catastrophe that I'm necessarily predicting in order for our economy to collapse. It might be a momentary large increase or doubling of energy prices to have AI data centers not be profitable, have all those stocks go down, have that trigger a number of things. It could be any number of things. But I think there is so much market manipulation right now. There's so much quantitative easing right now. There's so much money printing that they are basically this is like a dead corpse, and they're like doing CPR, and they're like shocking it, and the heart rate keeps pumping, but ultimately it's a dead guy on the ground. So a dead man walking, right, I guess is what I would call it. It's a sort of zombie economy. And I think, like we were saying, and not a lot of people in America are ready for that, the reality of the consequences of that. I don't think that for sure, and I don't think people are people know that the economy is sort of bad. They know that it's expensive and things are hard, and it's pretty hard to afford a home or do anything right now. But it's still, it's not catastrophic yet. And I think the idea that it can be and it will be for maybe a very long period of time, and that we will, as if we are the English Empire, right, at the end of the 70s, sort of forever taking a dive and then staying there. That's what's happening to us right now. And I don't think people in America, they really can't get that through their head. And I think, people may be viewing this who are not in America, who are looking at all the developments here and thinking, well, how is that possible? When you guys realize that all your leaders are the Epstein class, and you're starting all these wars and this, that, and the third. But you have to understand that for a large part of the people in the West and Europe and America, our whole life has had a certain level of development that seemed totally, almost unideologically promised to us, and there has really been this dumbing down of the American populace, and so they're not informed on these things like even Europeans are, or people in the global South, or in China or Russia are. So people are in for a rude awakening, and I saw a Mint Press News YouTube short about, they just asked 3 guys in New York about what they thought about the Trump's dealing of the Iran war. And I thought it was perfectly emblematic of the 3 different responses that the average American would give. One was, the first guy was like, I basically support Trump, but I don't really know what's happening. I just support him. I just assume I support him. A MAGA diehard, basically. Partisan MAGA diehard. Could have been equally 4 years ago a Biden person talking about the Ukraine war. So I won't, it's the same thing. The next guy was like, well, I don't really know, but, it looks pretty bad, but I don't know, and then the first guy who was like the mad guy was like, wow, really? You think that? And he just like was pissed off at his friend for saying that and just like walked away and like was like, all right, you got to get, find a ride home. Yeah. And then the third guy was like, dude, I don't give a fuck, smoke weed and get bitches and fuck bitches and get money. And I think that's totally emblematic of, and I don't want to put those people down, but the level of analysis, of comprehension, of just intelligence, and the range of emotions, which is, one, people who really believe in some sort of faction of the government, and they actually ideologically believe that what they're doing, whether in reality it comports with it or not, that they're somehow doing the right thing or that their team will fix it. 2, there's the average person who doesn't really think much about it, but realizes, yeah, the economy does kind of suck, and like, sucks that it kind of sucks, but whatever, I don't really think about it too much. And then the last and final is the person who is totally checked out from it because they think they can't really affect it, or it's just too complicated to think about, or it's like gay and cringe to like be talking about stuff like this, and that you should just go out, have social relations, and, do your job. Which is also, to an extent, they're all understandable viewpoints, but they all lack any sort of depth, any sort of knowledge of the things that we just said. And I think that's very scary, because not only does it mean that what's happening and what we're predicting may be inevitable, but it means that most people in America are not ready for it, which means that there will be widespread panic when, the dam sort of gives. And I I do worry about that. But I think I've harped on that a little bit on the previous 2 episodes. So another thing I want to talk with you about, let me get your thoughts on this, and it goes back to the oil again, is, well, let me just look at this story here. So the, what's called the, I don't know how to fucking pronounce this, Soraya al-Waya al-Dam, which is a Iraqi Shiite militia that is aligned with Iran, which, newsflash, I would hope to say I'm pretty up on some of these things. I've never fucking heard of them before. But they they basically came to an agreement with the American occupying forces in the what's called the Victory Base in Baghdad. The American and NATO. I'm just reading from their spokesperson. This guy Abu Mahdi al-Jafari. The American and NATO forces requested a 24-hour truce from the Iraqi resistance factions through the Iraqi government to finalize the withdrawal of their forces from the Victory Base in Baghdad to Turkey. I think they're currently on their way through Jordan right now. There's photo and video evidence of that. So they've withdrawn from the Victory Base in Baghdad. It goes on to say, most of the Iraqi resistance factions that received the government's request agreed to the truce on the condition that Hasht al-Salbi sites from Holy Samara to Holy Karbala are not targeted. So basically we're allowing the Western and American and NATO forces to leave this base if you don't hit where we're occupied at. They go on to say the Americans are now present only in the Kurdistan region of Iraq after being expelled by all the blessed resistance factions from all their other positions. So I think this really underscores the fact that Iran single-handedly within 3 weeks has pretty much done what every other Arab, North African, and Persian force in the region has sort of wanted to do or grasped at in the last 50 years, which is to expel the foreign invaders quite swiftly, and it's now happening at a rate that's permeating further and further away from Iran. And this isn't even Iran. This is a faction of maybe what do you call it, a PMU, a popular mobilization unit in Iraq, in some province in Iraq. So I think that really underscores just how on the toe NATO, America, pretty much almost every European power is in the Middle East. And I guess I want to ask you, is it the end for the West in the Middle East and their bases and their colonial operations? Is Iran is this the death knell for Western imperialism in West Asia?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There won't be an American base in the region in within a few years. I think that's almost a certainty. One of the more difficult questions to answer is what's the fate of Israel?
Right.
Because Israel is essentially a giant American base. Or, maybe you could go the other way around. But, it's really, this is going to be a question of, will Israel even exist in 10 years? Certainly not in the way it exists today.
Right.
But as a political entity, it's hard to see how it's going to survive. That is pretty remarkable that they're completely withdrawn from Iraq. I don't expect it to be much longer before they withdraw from other positions in the Gulf. The ones that they haven't already withdrawn from. Bahrain is all the footage that has come out of there. It doesn't appear that there's much of a military presence that they can even sustain there. It's just being hit so hard. These Gulf countries are going to their governments are really, they're essentially beholden to the United States. They were the ones who allowed the United States to put their bases there, but they're not popular governments. They're fabricated governments. They're colonial governments. They essentially come from back from the Sykes-Picot Agreement established after World War I, where they broke up the Ottoman Empire's territories and they created these new countries that Britain and France controlled, which were then handed over to the United States as those empires declined. And this is I don't see a way that the United States can continue to project military power in the region for much longer. Yes, it is the death nail in the coffin. It is irreversible. The harder they fight it, the more resistance they're going to come across. You can go back and try, a lot of the videos are censored now, but you can try and find videos at the start of the war in say Bahrain and Iraq, where Iranian missiles were coming down and hitting American bases, and the people who are videotaping them, the local Iraqis, are cheering.
Yeah.
They're celebrating the destruction of this foreign military that's been there for decades. And who can blame them? Who can blame them?
Yeah.
Essentially, if there was a military base from some other country that they've been fucking things up in my backyard and nearby for years, I would be celebrating too.
Yeah.
And what the Iranians have essentially done is they've demonstrated that with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, particularly, but also in their missile campaign, their targeting campaign, that they that regional geography is more important, and regional logistics is more important than however much money you throw into your military budget and whoever you bribe in the governments of other countries and whoever you pay off and whatever sorts of nefarious alliances you make. It doesn't matter when you have a people who are in a government that is supported by the people, who is committed to protecting its own interests. This is not this is something that I think is particularly difficult to see coming. If you look back in history and you pick out particular wars, it's not hard to see at the outset, really, when you're learning about it, who was going to win and who was going to lose. This is a very clear instance. I think, looking back, say at the start of the Ukraine war, so you and I knew immediately that the Ukraine government will be defeated. Russia is going to establish whatever system it wants there. They're going to dictate the political and economic outcomes of the war. Not a difficult thing to see, but you get all this noise, and the political instincts of the people in power who are so corrupt and incompetent at this point that, you know, essentially, one, they don't really care who wins or who loses because it's not necessarily the outcomes they're trying to achieve. Yeah, that's tied to, you know, their promotions, the money that they're going to get when they resign, whoever is a major power broker like Miriam Adelson or Sheldon Adelson, and what their desires are. It doesn't really matter to them what the outcome is, because you don't get promoted in DC for being right. You get promoted for doing something that is what your masters want. You know, what these high level bureaucrats, masters, and these industrialists and these bankers and these deep state officials.
Yeah,
that's you get promoted for towing the line. Showing you're a good boy.
I touched on this in the last episode, just by myself, but I think one of the problems now, because I totally agree with the Ukraine comparison about, isn't it interesting that we have these wars and, you know, this war may go on for years, unfortunately, but same with Ukraine, it's gone on for years, and it's number one, and I don't think we were really following Ukraine before it happened, but certainly people were. But for the people who were following it, number one, is totally predictable. Number two, totally a solved question. The outcome is totally knowable, and yet the war continues for years on end. And I hate to say it, but that may be the case here, and I wonder, like, let's see, I have some stories here, and I want to get your perspective on this too, because this has been sort of confusing me. This is the Cradle. They talk about Saudi Arabia and Qatar arrest Mossad agents planning terrorist attacks. That was reported by Tucker Carlson, and a few other people have commented on it. There's also there was another story. Okay, so there was a drone strike on the Azerbaijani airport. This is in Al Jazeera now. Iran denies its drone hits airport in Azerbaijan's exclave as war widens. So this is an interesting development. So apparently not all of the strikes that are happening in West Asia right now are coming from Iran. Some of them seem to be happening by other actors, possibly Mossad. And it would seem to be that they are trying to do false flag attacks on other countries in the Middle East in order to drag them into the war and put them on their side. I wonder, this is such a suicidal tendency here by the Israelis and probably by the Americans too. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that the Americans are doing, you know, joint military operations in this regard. I mean, they have to be, because if the Israelis are doing something, then it's de facto funded, and you know, all the equipment, they're equipped by the Americans. So whether it's de jure or de facto, the Americans are involved in this. And I just have to wonder, like, if your goal is to defeat Iran, and at the same time you are widening the war, and at the same time you are also destroying certain assets of your alleged allies in order to sort of maybe garner their position to fight Iran. I mean, this is just totally incomprehensible and suicidal. And I wonder, like, what really are the goals of Israel in this war, Israel and America, and I think they're sort of synonymous. But what are the goals here? Because it seems everything that they've done has been not strategic. It hasn't been strategic. They haven't necessarily been like, oh, we're gonna go find the headquarters of the naval fleet or whatever and bomb that. Maybe because they can't. They probably can't. A lot of these places are underground. And so then they go, oh, we're just going to bomb a school, or we're going to do a false flag operation on an airport, or we're going to bomb our own oil facility of our allies and blame it on Iran so that our allies can then try and mobilize their military to fight with us because we need more people. But this is a sort of Ouroboros loop, right? It's like Iran is such a huge power, nuclear power, whatever. They're proving very formidable, and we're losing all our air defenses, our offensive capabilities. So we need more people to fight them with us. So in order to do that, we're going to destroy their countries and their capabilities to make them, and blame it on Iran to make them mad. But then they won't have that many capabilities, right? And they'll be crippled. And so where does this end, right? This is a sort of escalation ladder that is like, I don't know where it ends, and I don't really see any strategic, I don't see any rational goals here. And that is what scares me about this war and makes me go schizo, because it's like, when you start to think about that, do you think, there was a story, I don't think I have it up, but there was a story about how there were American military generals, I don't know generals, but some sort of rank in the Middle East, in West Asia at certain bases, and they were giving, reportedly, they were giving speeches to their troops, something along the lines of, Trump, is doing this war because God told him to, and we're basically going to bring about some sort of Armageddon-like conflict to, I don't know, bring the rap, or something to that effect. And we know the Zionists and the people in the Chabad cult are very much enwrapped in this sort of ideology. And for me, this is what really scares me, is not just the fact that they are destroying a nation, because, not just the strategic, oh, it's Iran, it's Eurasia, it will be the connection between China, Russia, and Africa and Europe will all go through Iran, the Belt and Road Initiative, the north-south corridor from the port of Chabahar to north, right? It's not just that, because if it was just that, then they would just be bombing ports, and roads and airports, and then just trying to destroy the cities, But this is something sort of, it's like emotional, it's like religious, And I wonder, at this point, do you think that the non-rational goals are winning out, the ones that are cult-like and religious in nature? Do you think that is what is spurring military action at this point? Or do you think it really is that they're very stupid and that they sort of are just throwing shit at the wall? Or both, maybe? I'm going to go turn the light on. It's getting dark in here. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's both. But I think it's probably the irrational side. Yeah, I mean it's their goal is it's completely diluted, but it's the same thing as Lebensraum. What the Germans wanted, the Nazis wanted. But before that, the German Empire had this idea that they wanted to expand and have a lot of, there were Germans across Europe before World War II, because, Germany wasn't this country until late in the 1800s, and it was full of all these German kingdoms and all these German people and German-speaking ethnicities throughout Europe. So the German Empire was created, and there was a tension there that Germany existed is much larger at that point than it is today. But they wanted to incorporate all Germans into this society. But there were also other people living nearby the Germans. And this sort of idea, this concept of expanding, to conquer all of Europe, to have this, this quote-unquote Lebensraum, this living space for the German people, that was part of the empire. That was part of the creation of the empire and the mythology of the German Empire, and it was a fundamental pillar of the Third Reich, of the Nazis, when they took power. And it's the same thing. This supposed greater Israel project. I'm not sure how great it would be. It would probably be one of the most abhorrent and criminal things that humans have ever done to each other. But that's what their goal is. That's what they want. It is the insane crazies that have won, the fanatical lunatics. They're setting the policy agenda. They were setting the policy agenda previously, but they are now completely running the show without any resistance. They have control over the White House and the Pentagon. The only thing that is restraining the United States, militarily right now, is the generals and the admirals and the officer leadership in the military who know things about war and recognize that this is an unwinnable situation. Their military objectives are impossible to complete, at least at the scale that the military is at. Remember, when we invaded Germany in World War II, D-Day there were 2 million people involved in that landing. Germany had a population of 40 million people. They had an army of 5 million people or so. Iran has a population of 90 million people, and it is a much, much larger country than Germany ever was. Yeah. Even at the peak of whatever their military occupation of Europe. I might be wrong about that, but at least when Germany was at the height of the German Reich in the early stages of World War I, Iran is a much larger country. It's a much more mountainous country.
It's half the size of Europe. It's about half the size of Europe. So that's huge.
So the officers are the only ones who are restraining this, but though they will lose because there are fanatical officers and fanatical generals who are going to replace them if they don't comply. The crazies have won. Israel is essentially a continuation of Nazi policy, in my belief. The whole idea of Nazism was to rid Europe of the Israelis or the Jews. And what happened at the end of World War II? Well, most of them went to Israel and the United States. Those are the two largest population of Jews in the world. The idea of creating a Jewish state is, something that I think Hitler would have probably been very unopposed to.
I think he did support some of these
didn't
ideas.
Really, the final solution, the Holocaust, it didn't come until later in the war. They just wanted to kick them out to begin with. And so what this is it's a Nazi state, and it is has entered its final form. The fascist Nazistic elements are in control. They have been for a while, but they have this cloud of partial restraint by the United States. They have to drag it along this big empire that it has essentially been infiltrated and controlled by the Israeli government for who knows how long. I'm not familiar with the history. I'm sure at the end of this conflict, at the end of this war, many years from now, more and more documents and details will come out about how deeply Israel controlled the United States. Israel controls the United States. The Israeli intelligence apparatus controls the United States. So it is that, and it maybe more so in the United States. It is fanatical, and it is a high degree of imperialism. It is also a state of profound hubris, arrogance, and ignorance, and the kind of thing that happens in late empires where people who are qualified are not in positions of authority. The empires function very well when qualified people are running the show, and they have to make capable decisions that involve compromise, which is the key to exercising power, because every time you try and get your way without any compromise, without mitigating other influences, you destroy your own influence and you create resistance to your own power. The people running the show who are not fanatical, perhaps they're more there for political reasons. They are most likely extremely incompetent and just idiots. I think it's the crazies, the fanatical crazies, the ideologues. They're leading the pack, and then the arrogance and the hubristic fools who are in positions of power are easily persuaded by them.
Yeah. Well, I really like this comparison, and I hadn't thought about it, but the Lebensraum and the Greater Israel Project. That's really a great comparison, and maybe a really good one-to-one. And the other thing you said about D-Day, that brings me to another document that I had pulled up here, which I think is very important. I think we should all be reading. This is the Brookings Institute, Which Path to Persia. This was written in 2009, and it basically outlines, it's about 1 to 200 page document, and it outlines if we were to go to war with Iran, what are all our options? They're gaming it out. And a lot of the things that have happened in the Iran war are in this document. And so it's very important to read this stuff because this, even though this is a step, it's almost just, and there are things in this document that you go, oh boy, yeah, they were, that didn't work out how they said it, you know what I mean? But because it is, even though this war is a step too far and totally even more fanatical than the Iraq war or Afghanistan or Syria and Libya, it is in a way the inevitable last step of those plans. Which Path to Persia, the Project for a New American Century, the so-called 7 countries in 5 years plan, the clean break strategy. All these things lay out post-fall of the Soviet Union how we will, in essence, either destroy, dismantle, or occupy excuse me, pretty much every single country in West Asia, because we need a new boogeyman and we need a new way to impose power. So we need to get the or the petrochemicals, the hydrocarbons, and we need to start to foment a base of operations in which to eventually encircle China, the new threat, as well as Russia, the re-emerging threat, and cannibalize it. And so even though there are the fanatics have won out, and that's why it's so drastic what's happening right now. But at the same time, this has been a plan. People are making a lot of, oh my God, George Bush looks competent compared to Trump at this point. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, this seems sort of like a continuation of, what people like Donald Rumsfeld wanted. They wanted Iran as that's the final jewel, right?
Right.
If you think about Syria, right, in order to bomb Iran from Israel or from the Mediterranean, if you fly, an F-35, you're going to have to go probably from Israel. Okay, you can go over Iraq, but if you want to go over the top, right, to go to Tehran, you have to go through Syria, right? So, and destroying Syria and taking that out of the axis of resistance, that's a part of this culmination to destroy Iran, right? That's kind of the eastern flank of West Asia, and the biggest and largest one. So this is a culmination of things, and people have been planning this, and I think they finally found someone stupid enough and movable enough in Trump to execute this, even though there have been previous presidents who said, that's insane, but I will destroy Libya. That's insane, but I will destroy Afghanistan. That's insane, but I will do this. Now they've got the guy who said, all right, we'll do it. Anywho, that's all to say, though. There's some interesting tidbits in this, and you talked about 2 million people on the D-Day landing, sort of rate of mobilization that the likes of which, we've never seen since World War II, and I don't think
That's more people than are in the entire armed forces of the United States.
Yeah. And listen to this quote. So this is about an invasion and later occupation of Iran. Scholars and counterinsurgency experts have suggested that it takes about 20 security personnel per 1,000 people to secure civilians against insurgencies and other forms of violence common in post-conflict reconstruction. This ratio suggests that an occupation force of 1.4 million troops would be needed for Iran. All right, 1.4 million troops.
First of all, that's low. I don't agree with that. I think that's probably. I think it would be at least 4 or 5 million. But
I mean, 90 million. What's the ratio? Let me do the math right now. They say, because they have 90 million. This is written in 2009, so 20 to 1,000 people. So what's that ratio? 20. It's about 0.02 times 90 million. 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's about 1.8 million. So, and I think that's still on the low end. For realistically, the amount of bodies that you would need to do a land invasion, or drop them in. I mean, this gets to another thing. How are you going to get them there? It's completely and totally unrealistic. But in the Brookings Institute paper, they talk about conscription. I mean, and they say that because they say even if it's 1.4 million people, and then they say, well, let's maybe cut that in half to 700,000 people because we're so I love the hubris in there, because we're so well trained and we have the highest level of military doctrine and we're the best basically. So even if we do that, they're like, that's basically every Marine, infantryman, every naval. It's basically everyone in the armed forces who picks up a gun. So it's totally unrealistic. So we would need to do some form of conscription. I mean,
that's not off the table.
That's right. Like, what do you think?
I mean, if I would bet that is almost a certainty. They're gonna, you'll see. Right now they didn't manage the propaganda in this very well at all. They're doing a poor job of it. But all these outlets that are supposedly opposed to the war, the New York Times or whoever outlet,
Wall Street Journal,
the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, MSN, which appear somewhat opposed to the war, they will transition to supporting it. And you'll see they'll blame anything. Essentially, they are only opposed to Trump. It is because it is a Trump policy. If it was Biden, they would be behind it.
Yeah. And they'll buy them like they did with NBC. They'll just sell them to an Israeli, and then they'll just put their own. I mean, what are the odds? And once again, I don't mean to catastrophize. I don't mean to say the craziest thing, but the way we see videos in Telegram about people getting snatched off the streets for Ukrainian conscription, I don't think that's out of the question in, a number of years here. I think people really have to understand this. I mean, we already know ICE is out of control. We already know the police in general are totally out of control, not to mention ATF, DEA. I think everyone on the left and right knows that.
They're already snatching people up anyway.
Right. So what are the odds that if they say we need to put boots on the ground, which they're already sending Marines there to Karg Island or something, and they're going to get blown out of the water, and then they're going to be like, well, we need more, and then we need more.
Yeah.
What are the odds that, in a number of months to years, and no one wants to join this war, they're going to have to be by force coming to people's doors and saying, you need to go fight for Israel against Iran in this meat grinder of a war against a nation that has 90 million people who are ideologically committed.
I think it's very high. I mean, in particular, I think it's high because let's get something straight, too. This war is out of control. There is spiraling out of control. It is escalating on an almost daily basis, is escalating. And Iran's not even their only target. We were already in a proxy war with Russia. I mean, it is essentially a hot war because of all of the general planning that is going on from the European Command for the war in Ukraine, where they're the offensives are they're not planned in Kiev, they're planned in NATO headquarters. But they expanded. We're still in war with Russia right now. Now they've expanded it to Iran. It's going to expand further. It's going to expand to include other countries. It's their main opponent, right, isn't Russia. It's not Iran. It's China. That's who they want to be at war with. It's impossible to win a war with China. It cannot happen. The U.S. cannot defeat China. It is impossible. But these people know they are the worst human beings. They're the worst quality of human beings that can ever be manufactured by a society. This is the lowest of the low that are driving this war. They're not smart people. They're not capable people. They are driven by their emotions, by greed, by lust for power, by their desire for sex and control of women and children, and they're gonna do whatever they want because that's what they're used to. They're used to getting whatever they want, whenever they want, in any situation. It's like, the Emperor Nero or something. That's who's running our. That's who's running our society.
Caligula, Nero,
The people like that, and Rome at least had a system of regulating its political leadership, where every so often, every few decades or years, there would be a civil war, and the less competent leadership would be killed. I'm the emperor now, you fucking idiot. And it worked for hundreds of years because the imbeciles who were, they were people who were replacing them were not good people either, but they were at least capable of managing. They understood the empire well enough to manage it and maintain it. There's none of that in the United States. There's no regulation on these people in power. They're promoted for the wrong reasons, and they're used to getting whatever they want, whenever they want, and they're arrogant. They have a degree of hubris that can only be created by spoiling a child for their entire lives as they are fully grown. They're children. They are children, but they are criminals who should be prosecuted and put behind bars for the rest of their lives. Most of them should probably be executed. We really are going to watch this war expand. And I hear it a lot too. People say, "Oh, the draft." They couldn't implement the draft.
They wouldn't do that.
They
tried that.
They tried. Nobody would do it. Nobody would join. It's like, well, they didn't. Every time they implement the draft, it's not popular.
Yeah.
They've never implemented a draft, and that's why they implement the draft.
Right. They have to.
They do it because I'm not fucking going.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's mindset is. That's the whole point of the draft. So, it's 100% in the realm of possibility, and I would say it's likely.
Yeah.
I would say it's very likely.
Trending likely.
I'm 29. You're what, 20? I'll be 29 in a week. But
gonna be 28 in a month or so.
Yeah, we're a little bit above the threshold.
Yeah.
But guess what? They're gonna raise the threshold.
Yeah. Ukraine, they got 50-year-olds.
The average age is people in their 40s.
Right. So
because you burn through those kids really quick.
Yeah.
Those kids who could have been contributing to the economy, starting families, helping people, who have bright futures ahead of them. Now they're dead somewhere on a battlefield.
Yeah.
2 million Ukrainian soldiers, something like that, have died, and a couple 100,000 Russian soldiers.
Million casualties,
given their lives. The potential for this to spiral out of total control is astronomical, because realistically there is no undoing this.
Yeah.
There is no reversing this. There is no stopping this now. It is out of the, Donald Trump may have started it, but it's out of his hands now.
Mm-hmm.
It's out of the hands of the generals. It's out of the hands of the Israelis and the control of everyone. It is.
I mean, look at Ukraine. Biden said, this will be quick, whatever, blah, blah. It passed his presidency. And then even the president who said, I'll end this as soon as I can. As soon as I get in there, I'll end this. And even, started diplomacy, at least a little bit. Now it's been, 4 years? It's been years. It's been since 2022. It's 2026 now. It'll probably go on for a little longer. So what does that entail for this conflict, right? Rich, people are saying, No, it'd only be days. No, it'd only be a couple of weeks. Now it's almost approaching a month now. So where's the end? And I know you said this is going to be a rapidly expanding conflict, and I think you disagree with me, but I don't know how you feel about it now. I believe that the Ukraine war, the beginning of the Ukraine war, was the beginning of World War III. And obviously it's a gradient, but it's not necessarily one thing that kind of starts it. But I do believe that that's the beginning, because it's just a proxy war where behind the proxies are these large power blocks of allies that permeate more than one continent. And so when I saw that happening, I thought, this is World War III. And now with Ukraine and with Iran, you've got Russia, China, Iran, many other BRICS nations. I don't know if I don't even know what to say about India right now, but at least Brazil, South Africa, you have Belarus, you have all these other nations versus Israel, America, most of Western Europe, lots of proxies around the world that they use, places like Azerbaijan and whatnot, and they're all distributed throughout multiple continents, and they all have one kind of interlinking conflict that interlinks to another one. And we see now that they're not just separated, they're starting to jump from one to the next. The Ukrainians were sending people to Israel because they had air defense knowledge, right? Chinese are sending, military intelligence to Iran right now. So now all these conflicts are becoming interconnected and they're becoming globalized, Do you think this is the beginning of a new world war?
I would, yeah, I would agree with that. Now, I think you're probably right. Like retroactively looking back at Ukraine, I think there'll be a historical debate on it, but I think when you look at, say, World War II, how it began in both the Pacific with Japan and in Europe with Germany, it wasn't like one day the war began. At first the Germans marched on the Rhineland that was occupied by France, and they took it back. And it was a political move. It didn't lead to a conflict. France sort of rolled over. Then they marched into Austria, and they took Austria. And then even the Austrians capitulated to the German army. And then they marched into Czechoslovakia, and they took the Sudetenland around Czechoslovakia, and it was brokered by Chamberlain. And then they broke the agreement, and they took the rest of Czechoslovakia anyways. And and then finally they launched their attack on Poland.
Yeah.
9 months passed after that happened. When it was over fairly quickly, they had an agreement with the Soviet Union. 9 months passed before they finally attacked France. And then several months after, I don't know what the exact timeline is, but months after that, they began Barbarossa, which was the meat of the war, which was the most destructive part of the war in Europe. The most deadly part of the war in Europe was the war between Germany and the Soviet Union. It took a long time. It escalated in various stages.
Right.
The same thing happened in Japan, in the Pacific theater. Their main target, the Japanese' main target, was China. They wanted to colonize China. China is too large to colonize as an imperial power. Everyone tried. The Germans tried. The French tried. The British tried. The Americans tried. They all tried to colonize China. They all failed. to an extent, the British were able to be successful in exploiting the Chinese markets, but they never were able to subjugate China in the ways that they subjugated India and most of the rest of their other colonies. But Japan wanted China. They had Korea at that point. They launched their war on Manchuria, a fabricated war where there was a false flag that began it. False flags are a part of history. We can't just ignore false flags and say that they're crazy conspiracy theories. Yeah. They are a reoccurring part of history. They happen throughout history, and they will continue to happen. There will probably be a false flag in the United States where many people will die that will try and suck it into this war.
Yeah, well, my coworker just the other day said, and we were bonding a little bit about, American Doomer, but she said, did you see there was a missile alert on the west, on California? And I was like, a missile? And they're like, yeah, they said Iran might throw a missile. And I said, well, they don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can't do that. And then I thought, but we could do that. But we can make an explosion, right? So it's going to start happening in America. It already did with that weird mass shooter guy who literally had a shirt on that said "Property of Allah." I mean, come on, guys. Let's get.
They'll try all sorts of shit. They'll throw whatever they can. That's what their tactic is right now. They're not as qualified as a lot of the leaders during World War II. And even I'm actually not super familiar, but they're much more competent in their planning than this administration. These idiots, and the one before it was equally as pathetic. And maybe the one before that was a little bit more serious, but still, the one before that was extremely pathetic in their ability to create a cohesive argument for war. They just made up their reasons for attacking Iraq, fabricated a whole lie. They'll do the same thing for this. This time they really just...
Well, they didn't even try.
Didn't even give a shit enough to lie to us. They just sort of said, we're doing it because we do whatever the fuck we want. And we don't want you reading more into the Epstein files to find out how many kids I raped and killed and ate. Japan took a lot, Japan, they invaded Manchuria, then they began, there's a Marco Polo Bridge incident, some skirmish began, and they began their invasion of mainland China, and they took city after city, and then they expanded the war, and they said, whoa, all of these European colonies should be ours. And so they, at the same time, at the same day, they launched a war against the United States, a war against the Dutch, the British, every single colony in the region that was not Japanese. Surprise, surprise, they lost that war decisively, and they are essentially they're controlled by the United States. We just had the goddamn Japanese prime minister licking the president's asshole, and it's been that. It's been that way for since the end of World War II.
Yeah,
military bases are. But yes, this is probably the start of World War III. I don't see how this conflict won't continue to expand and escalate month after month, year after year. There might be some period. There'll be a period where things will kind of become normalized, and then they'll escalate further. The only thing that really is stopping it from escalating is America's limited military capacity. So, in order to maintain an empire around the world, they're going to need to suck up every single young man they can find and throw them into the military, and sacrifice them. and build as many bombs and missiles and shells as possible. So we're going to see that transition. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
World War II in European theater started in 1939. In the Japanese theater, in the Asian theater, it was in the early 30s. I think it was 33. I might be wrong about that, but that's when the Manchuria incident occurred. So, yeah, these things, those wars were very complicated and protracted periods of instability. Where they start out as one thing with some sort of ideology, but then it just becomes like a way of life. And that's the way of life that we're going to be living in for, I would say, at least the next decade.
Yeah, the foreseeable future.
I think it's very likely that it will last 10 years, perhaps maybe even longer than that.
Yeah.
Our standard of living is going to decline dramatically. It's going to start slow, but it's going to become more and more dramatic. It's possible to. I mean, I've seen some indicators too that when the markets open, maybe even tomorrow.
Oh right, yeah. Sunday.
The S&P, the Nasdaq, and the Dow Jones all broke below their 200-day moving averages on Friday, which is not a good sign if you're heavily invested in the stock market. And even gold and silver are breaking down, but I think that is that's a good thing for people right now.
Yeah.
And I would say if you are if you have any money on hand, buy some gold and silver.
Yeah.
While it's cheap. While the price, I mean, it's not cheap now. It looks like it's expensive. It's $4,500 for an ounce of gold. It's probably going to go a little bit lower, and if it does, buy that shit. Get a quarter ounce, get a half ounce, and a whole ounce. Get as much as you can really conceivably put where you can move your money into, because you're gonna want it. You may not want it this year or next year or 2 years from now, but at some point you're gonna need that shit. I promise you that. You're gonna be in a situation where that might save your life.
Yeah, I've been saying this in the past 2 episodes. I think the motto has been buy gold, buy silver, buy a gun, talk to your neighbors, learn how to grow food. And if you can move to China, what do you? Just move there. I think it's time. I think it's time. I don't want to say necessarily that it's America is, oh my God, it's so over, bro. But I think if you're thinking about your standard of development going up year on year, you have to leave America and you have to go to mainland China or mainland Russia. There's maybe a few other places, but definitely those places. If you can get there and start a life there, if you have enough cash on hand, yes, I would say do it for sure. And I think we're kind of running up on time, so I'm going to start wrapping up. And that's usually what I say at the end is all that stuff, but I wanted to give you a chance, and I'll do it too. I've been doing the predictions, which I swore I would stop doing, but we're going to do them based on analysis. So they're not things that are going to happen, period. They're things that if things continue on the path, they necessarily will happen. I think for me right now, and this is maybe something a little less tangible than I predicted in the last ones, but for me, I think looking at the Strait of Hormuz and seeing what Iran is doing there, they have basically turned it into the petro-yuan gateway, and I'm predicting that yuan will be de facto the new reserve currency of most of the world moving forward. And I think I don't know what the whole India intrigue entails and how they play into it, but in terms of most of BRICS, or BIC, or should I say RIC, Russia, Iran, China, not India, because they're sort of a lost cause right now. In terms of those powers, I think the yuan and the people that they trade with, that will be the way that they settle international debts moving forward. What do you have a prediction or an analysis?
I think that I'll do maybe a short-term prediction that the dollar index is actually going to rise. Mm-hmm. The dollar is going to get a little bit stronger because there's going to be massive sell-offs.
Yeah.
For the next few weeks, maybe months, the stock market is going to fall significantly. Gold and silver and other commodities, other than oil, are going to fall in price because there's going to be margin calls.
Yeah.
As people who are have loaded, who have significant amounts of gold and silver, which are largely like banks and wealthy individuals, they own those positions because they've taken on big debts and they're going to get margin calls. They're going to have to sell their positions. But once that settles, it's going to start to rise significantly. And we're going to see highs in those metals that are much higher than the high we saw in January. Much higher. I mean, it's going to, even if you bought, say, in January at $5,500 for an ounce of gold, that was still a good purchase. And you're not gonna regret it. If you sell now, you'll regret it. But if you hold it for a year, maybe two, maybe less than that, you will be you'll be thanking yourself for making that kind of decision. So, yeah, I think we're gonna see a collapse of pretty much everything, of real estate, of the stock market. Of even safe haven assets are going to go down initially, and the only thing really going up is going to be oil and oil related stuff for the very short term future.
Yeah, and prices. I totally agree. And that just reminded me. Remember when Pam Bondi, before all this, was testifying to Congress about the Epstein files, and she's kind of floundering and blurted out, well, the stock market's at 50,000 right now, so none of this matters. Well, now I think it's at 46,000 or something right now. It's going to go to zero. My big prediction, and I said this last time too, really is line go down, pretty much. And I think you can, if you're degenerate, go to Kalshi, puts whatever we said a couple things, be a degenerate.
We're not financial advisors.
Not financial advisors, but we are retarded, so we do have that. So thanks everybody. Buy gold, silver. Talk to your neighbors, learn how to grow food and forage and be in a community and buy a gun and move to China if you can. Thanks, Conrad. This is a great episode. I'm going to try and post it as soon as we can. See you next time.